Let's turn to Ezekiel 40. And if you heard last week, we were in chapters 38 and 39 last week. And we discussed how there would be this, Ezekiel describes this confederation of mostly Islamic nations, but not entirely. They're led by Russia, and they come down from the north of the nation of Israel into the mountains of Israel, it says, presumably talking about the Golan Heights. And in talking about this, one of the major partners with Russia is Turkey. And we talked about current events and what's going on right now. Man, we are living in some wild times, and how the events that are described in Ezekiel, man, they could be tomorrow's news. And then we talked about, man, what's going to cause Russia to get involved? And we kind of pondered and talked about that a little bit. Well, I have another news article to share with you if the technical difficulties haven't kept us from our slides. This is in AlJazeera.com. Israel must be taught a lesson, Erdogan tells Putin, the leader of Russia. The leader of Turkey tells the leader of Russia they need to be taught a severe lesson. This is exactly what we're talking about right here in chapter 38 and 39. It's so crazy. I get like goosebumps thinking about that. This is the time that we're living in. I got the article I printed out here. It says Turkish president has told Russian President Vladimir Putin that the international community should give Israel a strong and deterrent lesson over its conduct towards Palestinians. He made the comment during a phone call with Putin, and it just goes on and says it's time for them to be taught a lesson. He pressed the UN Security Council to rapidly intervene with determined and clear messages against Israel. And the thing is, and we talked about this last week too, how for a lot of us who have been able to keep up with current events for more than a couple decades, because maybe we're a little bit older, Israel and Turkey had a working relationship up until 2010. This is recent, and now Turkey's saying, you've got to step in and do something, Russia. We're going to be right there and help you. Man, this is playing out exactly like this book has said for so long, and it's just now, man, the pieces are all fitting together. It's prophesied by Ezekiel 2,500 years ago. We read as well in chapters 38 and 39 that when this happens, and I'm not saying it's going to be this week, I'm not saying it's going to be this month, it could be another several years, who knows. But what we read in chapters 38 and 39, the Lord's going to intervene, and what is pictured is like a nuclear fallout. They use the weapons as fuel for 7 years. They wait 7 months to dispose of the bodies, and then when they do, they have someone putting markers by them, and then professional experts come in and dispose of them. They're taken to a special location for burial, and so the Lord intervenes. Then let's just back up a little bit. Let's look in chapter 39, verse 27, and notice what it says. He says, when I have brought them back from the peoples and gathered them out of their enemies' lands, and I am made holy in them in the sight of many nations, then they shall know that I am the Lord their God, who sent them into captivity among the nations, but also brought them back to their land, and left none of them as captive any longer. And I will not hide my face from them any more, for I shall have poured out my spirit on the house of Israel, says the Lord God. The captives are going to come back. They're going to face an invasion. That's yet in the future. Israel is then going to recognize at this time, they're going to embrace and realize it's the Lord that defended her. They're going to welcome Jesus as the Messiah. And the Lord says, I'm going to pour out my spirit on them. And then finally, they're just going to get it. They're going to understand. And that's the goal. That's what he says here. Then they will know that I'm the Lord their God. That's when they're going to get it. And when they do know, and when they do understand, man, it's you, Lord, then there's going to be the need for worship, okay? And that's what we're going to be looking at tonight. And I'd like to have you now flip all the way to the back of the book. The answers are always in the back, so let's turn to Revelation chapter 20. And just to get some perspective, I know a lot of you guys haven't been with us this whole journey through Ezekiel, but we're in this final section of Ezekiel, which began in chapter 33, which has been talking about the restoration of the nation of Israel and the nation being brought back together, the peoples coming from the enemy's land. And that is, what we've seen. Israel was born on a day in May 14, 1948. But there's going to be this battle that God's going to step in that hasn't happened yet. And then now the section that we're in and beginning tonight, still part of this bigger section that began in chapter 33, but from 40 to chapter 48, it's about a future millennial temple and kingdom. Not a kingdom of millennials, because no one would want to live there, but 1,000, I've been waiting all day to use that, 1,000-year period of peace and prosperity on the earth with Christ ruling with a rod of iron, okay? And this is described, this is why I want you to turn to Revelation chapter 20. It's brief, but the first few verses of chapter 20 describe this millennial reign. It says in chapter 20, "Then I saw an angel coming down from heaven, having the key to the bottomless pit and a great chain in his hand. And he laid hold of the dragon, that serpent of old, who is the devil and Satan, excuse me, and bound him for 1,000 years." I love that that's just an angel. I don't even know his name. Just an angel came down, got his keys and a chain, like the janitor or something. I was like, I'll take care of this, I'll take the trash out. Bound him for 1,000 years, verse 3, and he cast him into the bottomless pit and shut him up and set a seal on him so that he should deceive the nations no more till the 1,000 years were finished. But 1,000 years is a millennium, in case anybody is unaware. "But after these things, he must be released for a little while. And I saw thrones, and they sat on them, and judgment was committed to them. And then I saw the souls of those who had been beheaded for their witness to Jesus and for the word of God, who had not worshipped the beast or his image, and had not received his mark on their foreheads or on their hands. And they lived and reigned with Christ for that same period of time, 1,000 years." So tonight we're going to be looking at this vision that Ezekiel gets, begins to receive in chapter 40 of this future temple. And this passage that we're looking at, this passage in Revelation, the millennium itself is often debated with those with different views of the end time. And so before we begin, I want to just brush up on this a little bit, because there's a completely different understanding of how you'd read chapters 40 to 48 for some people, good, well-meaning Christians, and a different way to read them from others. And I want to explain before we start how we're going to look at these. And so there's three main views regarding the 1,000 years described in Revelation 20 that we just read. And the first one is premillennial. Premillennial is a literal interpretation of the Bible following the tribulation. Just as we read that 7-year period, Satan is cast in the abyss for a 1,000-year period. Christians from all ages rule and reign with Jesus Christ for that 1,000 years. That's a premillennial view of this passage. Next is post-millennial. If pre is before the millennium, post would be, oh, you guys are brilliant. Post-millennial theology believes that the church itself will usher in a 1,000-year period of peace and prosperity. Society is going to be changed by the church's influence. And after the church has this 1,000-year period, then Christ will return. Kind of like maybe like a valet, It's like, hey, we pulled the world around front for you. We got her all warmed up. She's ready to go. Here's the keys, Jesus. You can take it. Everything's great now. So pre is we're living in the 1,000 years, in the period before this 1,000 years. Post, Jesus returns after that 1,000 years. And the third view, I'll tell you too that second one is not the most popular. And then third is amillennial. When you put a in front of a word, it takes it away in the Greek. And so amillennial believes that there is no millennium. And the descriptions and the dates and the things in the book of Revelation and elsewhere talking about end times things, the theological word is eschatology. All of those things are figurative. And in fact, the entire period, an amillennialist will say, from the time that Jesus ascended to when he returns, it could be now, it could be another 2,000 years. That whole period is called the millennium. It's a figurative thing, but we're living in this period right now. And so, again, there's lots of people that love Jesus with lots of different views, but we fall into, Calvary Chapel, myself, we fall into the pre-millennial category. That's where we are, because every time, there's lots of reasons why, but when it comes to this, every time the Bible itself talks about fulfilled prophecy, it's talking about literal prophecy. We never read someone in the New Testament take something from the Old Testament as figurative. Well, the virgin shall have a son. Well, is it really talking about, a virgin? It's going to be born in Bethlehem. Yeah, okay, but really Bethlehem, not one stone, Jesus said, would be left upon another. But did he really mean not one stone? That's never taken as figurative when we read it in here. And so prophecies concerning Jesus' first come were literal. He really did come. The New Testament, when we read the New Testament, they believed all the prophecy that they lived through was literal. And so there's no reason for us to look at prophecy and say, well, now all of a sudden it's figurative. Now all those things, it's not really what the Bible is saying. And so the Calvary Chapel, the way that we view eschatology, end times thing, we believe that the rapture is going to be literal, that believers are going to be snatched up, as the word described in 1 Thessalonians 4. That's literally going to happen. And then following the rapture, there's going to be a literal 7-year period as described in the book of Daniel as the 70th week of Daniel. It's described in Revelation from chapters 6 through 18, this period of time when Jesus said, in this world you will have tribulations. And that happens. The enemy is his plans and devices, certainly. We have a fallen nature to deal with. There is tribulations, but the tribulation that is described here is not the plans of the enemy, and it's not our fallen nature. It is the wrath of God poured out on mankind. It's not Satan, oppressing mankind. It's God saying, I'm going to pour out my wrath on mankind. And so we believe that's literal. Following the rapture, the 7-year tribulation, we believe that there's literally going to be a second coming. There's literally going to be an Armageddon that we read about in Revelation 19. Then what we read in chapter 20, Satan is literally going to be bound for 1,000 years, and we're literally going to rule and reign with him during that period of time. So that's how we're going to view these last 9 chapters in the book of Ezekiel. Like I said, the second most popular way, a lot of you have come from that background, I have as well, is an amillennial view where this is all spiritualized. Everything leading up to this period, what all those judgments against Israel, that's going to happen. But once you start talking about restoring Israel or a future temple, that's all figurative. The church kind of takes their place. But we're going to view this as we're talking about very literal things here in a literal temple as it's really going to happen. And so that's what you're in store for here. The subjects that we're going to rule and reign over, as I said, this 1,000-year period, we're going to be ruling and reigning with Jesus, and we're going to be ruling and reigning over Jews and Gentiles who turn to the Lord during the tribulation period. And so they're going to be coming to the temple to worship, and that's what we're going to be looking at here. Now, that's a lot of information. You guys doing okay? We haven't even started yet, and I've already overload, right? I don't know, maybe some of you guys can read blueprints. I can okay, that's a wall, I think, But if you have a mind for that, okay, it can come off the page and you can picture that, all right? You can see a schematic and it makes sense to you. But for the rest of us, man, show us a picture. I want to see a picture of what you're talking about. And so Ezekiel, he isn't drawing the blueprints out for us. He's describing the blueprints to us. And so we have tonight a lot of visuals, and Spencer's in the back. Let's all look at Spencer right now. Spencer, we're going to thank you in advance because there's a ton of visuals for you to look at. For some of you, it might just be easier, honestly, to just I'm not suggesting this, I'm just saying for you it might be easier because it's going to be back and forth, is just watch the screen, because almost every verse, as Ezekiel's describing these schematics, we're going to have a visual of what he's saying. But before we get into that, I want to get an overall idea of the size of the temple that we're talking about. So slide number 1 here. If you guys can make this out, some of you guys might be sitting a little far away. At the bottom in the green is an American football field, okay? So that's what that is. The dark brown, black, whatever that is, just above that is the tabernacle, the Old Testament tabernacle, the portable, tent that they would set up, and then the Israelites would move and then pop up the tabernacle again. And the orange is Solomon's temple that David had the plans for, got the supplies for, and finally built by Solomon. In the orange up on top is Herod's temple. That's where Jesus would have worshipped, and during the first century, it was actually took a long time to build and never fully got constructed all the way. But that's in the top right, and then now in the black, that's what we're going to be looking at. And everybody has a handout as well, and that's going to kind of correspond to that black portion. And so between the visuals and the slides that are going to come up, and this sheet of paper and the text, we're going to try to get an idea of what this temple is going to look like. And so, you guys ready for this? Now, I'm going to give you credit in advance too. No one has really walked out yet, but there is a lot of folks that don't go through this, okay? And I'm proud of you guys, because this, even just reading through this, it can get tedious, right? I think the visuals are going to help, but kudos to you guys. Here we go, chapter 40, verse 1. In the 25th year of our captivity, at the beginning of the year, on the 10th day of the month, in the 14th year after the city, Jerusalem, was captured, on the very same day, the hand of the Lord was upon me, and he took me there. Okay? All of that says that this takes place at about 572 BC. We know how long, we know when Ezekiel was taken captive. We know when the city was captured. This is the 25th year of his captivity. It's the 14th year after Jerusalem fell. And he says, it's been gone for 14 years, but the Lord took me there. Verse 2, he took me there. In the visions of God, he took me into the land of Israel. And he set me on a very high mountain. On it, towards the south, was something like the structure of a city. He took me there, and behold, there was a man whose appearance was like the appearance of bronze. He had a line of flax and a measuring rod in his hand, tape measure we'd say, and he stood in the gateway. Okay, so he's transported in this vision and taken to Jerusalem. The last time this has happened, and if you've been through us, the Lord's kind of taken him places and shown him things. But the last time he's been taken to Jerusalem was chapters 8 through 10, 8, 9, and 10. And during that period, what he witnessed was that the glory left the temple. It went out the eastern gate, and the glory of the Lord was gone from the temple. But now he's going to begin to see it come back. And so what he says, it's so large, it's something like a city. And it really is. But the temple, that thing that you have in your hand there, the black that we just showed up there, it's at least 562,000 square feet. It's over twice the size of our property here. It's over 12 acres of temple grounds. And so, yeah, it is something like a city that he's looking at. And so he says in verse 4 that the man, this angelic guide, he says, said to me, Son of man, look with your eyes and hear with your ears and fix your mind on everything I show you. For you were brought here so that I might show them to you. Declare them to the house of Israel, everything you see. He's a captive. The city's been gone for 14 years. He's been a captive for 25. But this angelic guide says, take this back to the captives. Take this back to the house of Israel. Take it back to who? Those who are hurting. Those who don't see an end in sight. Those who don't see how God is going to work all of this out. Show them, he says. I want you to show them that God is faithful. Verse 5. Now, there was a wall all around the outside of the temple. And in the man's hand was a measuring rod, 6 cubits long, each being a cubit and a handbreadth. Okay? A cubit, for you guys, Bible students may remember, they didn't have tape measures. A cubit was from the tip of your finger to your elbow. So it's a cubit and a handbreadth. We're talking 18 inches plus another 4 or 5, about 21 inches each here. There's 6 of those. And so 6 cubits And 6 handbreadths means about 10.5 feet, 10.4 feet. It's listed on the visuals as 10.2 feet, so 10 foot 3 inches or whatever. And so he says he measured the width of the wall structure 1 rod and the height 1 rod. And so kind of around the base of the whole thing that you're looking at in your printout is like 10 feet high and 10 feet wide around this whole thing. And so that's the base to the gate. Then verse 6, he says, then he went to the gateway, which faced east. He went up its stairs and measured the threshold of the gateway, which was 1 rod wide, and the other threshold was 1 rod wide. So again, this eastern gate is this especially holy one. It's the one the glory departed from. It's the one that in chapter 43 he's going to see the glory come back into. But this entryway itself is about 10 feet across and 10 feet wide. Aren't these helpful? Someone put a lot of work. It wasn't me. I found them online. That's the hard work I put into it. But someone put a lot of work into this, and it's so helpful to see this. Okay, so it's about 10 feet by 10 feet there, the entryway. Verse 7, each gate chamber was 1 rod long and 1 rod wide. Between the gate chambers was a space of 5 cubits, and the threshold of the gateway by the vestibule of the inside gate was 1 rod. Obviously, that makes a ton of sense, right? Okay, so as you're going into this entryway, there's little guard areas there, guard chambers it says on there, and about 10 feet square or so, and then there's about 7.5 feet in between each chamber there. And then in verses 8 and 9, still looking at this entry area, it says he also measured the vestibule of the inside gate 1 rod. Then he measured the vestibule of the gateway 8 cubits, and the gate post 2 cubits. The vestibule of the gate was on the inside. Okay, so after these chambers, there's a little porch area that kind of faces inward. It faces into the temple area. Can you guys believe you're here on a Wednesday night talking about porches and chambers and all of that? And here we are. Okay, so first part of verse 10, it says, in the eastern gateway, that's still where we are, there was 3 gate chambers on one side and 3 on the other. So there's 3 of these little guard shack things there that are built in on each side there. And then the last part of verse 10 says the 3 were all the same size. Also, the gate posts were of the same size on this side and that side, okay? So there's chambers on each side, there's pillars on each side as well. It's just matching, it's symmetrical. If you hang around me getting ready on a Sunday or something, I'm all about symmetry. I love symmetry. I'm like, let's get these rows lined up, and Lord's into symmetry too. Okay, verse 11. He measured the width of the entrance to the gateway, 10 cubits, and the length of the gate, 13 cubits. And so this entryway, this gate facing inward, is about 15 by 20 feet there. And then verse 12, there was space in front of the gate chambers, 1 cubit on this side and 1 cubit on that side. The gate chambers were 6 cubits on this side and 6 cubits on that side. Okay, verse 13. Then he measured the gateway from the roof of the one gate chamber to the roof of the other, and the width was 25 cubits as door faces door. And say the width of this roof area that covers the entire entryway and the chamber, it's about 43 feet, 41.7 it says on there, wide. Okay, so now we looked at the base, we've gone up the steps, into this entryway, through the entryway. If you could picture this or look at your printout, and you came around the eastern gate, you walked up the steps through the entryway, and now we're turning back around to look at the gate from the other side. Verse 14, he measured the gate posts 60 cubits high, and the court all around the gateway extended to the gate post. And so there's these columns, the big tall columns on both sides of the gate, about 100 feet tall or so on each side there. Verse 15, Spencer, you doing okay? You're doing great, bro. From the front of the entrance gate to the front of the vestibule of the inner gate was 50 cubits, okay? So this entryway, the entire entryway, that's all we're looking at so far, is about 80 to 87 feet, somewhere in there, feet long. The whole entryway he describes is really, it's roughly the size of this sanctuary right here. So this is the entryway. And then verse 16, there were beveled or narrow window frames in the gate chambers and in the intervening archways on the inside of the gateway all around, and likewise in the vestibules. There were windows all around on the inside, big tall windows on both sides. Okay, we're getting a picture of the entryway. Oh, we're still on the entryway. Last part of 16 says, and on each gate post were palm trees. And this is where the palm trees come in for aesthetic. Isn't that gorgeous? It's beautiful. That's great. Verse 17, we go from the entryway now. We walked up the steps. We looked at both sides. We turned back around and looked at the entryway. And now we're turning and we're looking into the courtyard. Verse 17, he brought me into the outer court, and there were chambers and a pavement made all around the court. And then it says 30 chambers faced the pavement. Okay, you can kind of see all those little squares all the way around. There's 30 squares. You can see them on your printout right there. There's chambers all around the wall, and they're facing the inside, and it's really like 30 booths facing the pavement. We're not told what they're for, but a lot of folks speculate that's exactly what they are, is that they're booths, that they're places, they're actual booth-type areas where the worshipers would come and have a meal or whatever that they would be having that time in the temple. That's a place for them to hang, okay? Verse 18, the pavement was by, or the ground, the pavers was by the side of the gateways corresponding to the length of the gateways. This was the lower pavement. So this is a step down from where we're going here. That's the lower pavement. Verse 19, then he measured the width from the front of the lower gateway to the front of the inner court exterior, 100 cubits towards the east and the north. Okay, this is the outer courtyard, the area in the middle from the wall of the inner court all the way is about 165, about 175 feet or something, that big area around there. And then verses 20 through 22, this is the entryway coming from the north. It says, and the outer court was also a gateway facing north, and he measured its length and its width. Its gate chambers, 3 on this side and 3 on that side, its gate posts and its archways had the same measurements as the first gate. The Holy Spirit's being gracious to us and not just saying, yeah, it's the same as the one before. Thank you for that. Its length was 50 cubits and its width 25. Its windows and those of its archway and also its palm trees had the same measurement as the gateway facing east. It was ascended by 7 steps, and its archway was in front of it. So same dimensions as the eastern gate. So we came in from the east, walked in the steps. We looked at the little chambers, and then we walked into the courtyard. We looked back at the gate. Now we've walked around, if you're looking at your map, to the northern side of the gate. And then it says in verse 23, the gate of the inner court was opposite of the northern gateway, just as the eastern gateway, and he measured from gateway to gateway 100 cubits. Okay, so it's 100 cubits there from the outer courtyard to the inner courtyard, verses 24 to 26. I'm saying all these verses to help Spencer, well, and you if you're following along. But verse 24, after that he brought me toward the south, and there was a gateway that was facing south, and he measured its gateposts and archways according to these same measurements. There were windows in it and its archways all around like those windows. Its length was 50 cubits. Its width was 25 cubits. 7 steps led up to it, and its archway was in front of him. It had palm trees on its gateposts, one side and on the other. Okay, so this gate on the south now is exactly the same as the east and the north. Again, we came up in the east. We veered around to the north. Then we walked all the way around the outer courtyard. And then we're looking at the southern gateway. Verse 27. There was also a gateway on the inner court. Okay, so now our back is to the exterior southern gate, and we're looking in. There's also a gateway on the inner court facing south, and he measured from gateway to gateway towards the south, same as the first. It's 100 cubits, that distance between of the pavement there of the outer courtyard. These are all the 3 gates. They're all symmetrical, and so he's taken us around. Now verse 31. He brought me to the inner court through the southern gateway. He measured the southern gateway according to these same measurements. Also, its gate chambers, its gate posts, and its archways were according to these same measurements. There were windows in it and archways all around. It was 50 cubits long, 25 cubits wide. There were archways all around, 25 cubits long, 5 cubits wide. Its archway faced the outer court. Palm trees were on its gate post, and going up to it were 8 steps. Okay, the outer court had 7 to get up that area. Now we're in the inner courtyard, and we go up another 8. Okay, you guys doing okay? Yeah, okay. Verse 32. He brought me into the inner court facing east, and he measured the gateway according to these same measurements. Also its gate chambers, its gate posts, and its archways were according to these same measurements. And there were windows in it, and its archways all around. It was 50 cubits long, 25 cubits wide. Its archway faced the outer court. Palm trees were on its gate posts, and on this side and on that side, and going up to it were 8 steps. Okay, this is the gate for the inner court. On the east side, it's similar to the gates on the outer court. Verse 35 to 37. This is so exciting, isn't it? Great. He describes the gate on the north side of the inner court. He brought me to the north gateway and measured it according to these same measurements. Also its gate chambers, its gate posts, and its archways. It had windows all around it. Its length was 50 cubits. Its width was 25 cubits. Its gate posts faced the outer court. Palm trees were on the gate posts on this side and on that side. And going up to it were 8 steps. You've never known so much about the Millennial Temple, have you? Yeah? So great. Okay, so now verse 38 describes like a kitchen type area where sacrifices are prepared, okay? And as I'm describing this, just think, okay, this is in the future. It's a 1,000-year reign of Christ. We're ruling and reigning with them. And then it says there's a chamber, verse 38, and its entrance by the gatepost of the gateway where they washed the burnt offering. Now, let's pump the brakes. You're like, what? I thought this was during the millennium. I thought this was after Jesus has died, after the tribulation, after all of that. Why are there sacrifices? This is a good question. It's a legitimate question. But the answer is pretty simple, and it's the same reason that there was sacrifices in the Old Testament. Because animal sacrifices, when you read through the Old Testament, the animal dying never took away sin. Okay? It isn't like, oh, if I kill this goat, that that's going to take my sins away. It was always pointing to something else. When Samuel, David, whoever, when they sacrificed in the Old Testament, the death of that animal didn't take away sins. The Bible says the blood of goats and bulls, cannot take away sin. So the Israelites in the Old Testament, those who honored God, were saved the same way that you and I are. We're saved by grace through faith. And those Old Testament sacrifices that we read all through Leviticus and all through this were pictures of what Christ's sacrifice would do. It's looking forward to what Jesus would do for us. Okay? So those Old Testament sacrifices look forward to Jesus' sacrifice. Sacrifices in the millennium are going to look back on Christ's sacrifices. And so these sacrifices that are taking place in the millennium, it's going to be like a memorial. It's very similar to us celebrating communion, right? We're celebrating the fact, here's something that we're presented with. Communion itself doesn't take away our sin, but we're celebrating the fact that Jesus did die for us. And so that's kind of what's taking place here. And so the area of this inner court has this kitchen-like wash area to wash there's blood that's happening, all of that. This is an area that's taken care of. And then verse 39, there's tables that are right there next to these washing areas. It says in the vestibule of the gateway were 2 tables on this side and 2 tables on that side on which to slay the burnt offering, the sin offering, and the trespass offering. So there's these butchering tables. That's exactly what they are. Then they are in this raised area of the inner court sitting right there. And then verse 40, it says at the outer side of the vestibule, as one goes up into the entrance of the northern gateway, were 2 tables. And on the other side of the vestibule, the gateway, were 2 tables. Okay, so there's another set of tables on the lower area there. And it says, verse 40, verse 41, 4 tables were on this side, 4 tables on that side, by the side of the gateway, 8 tables in which they slaughtered the sacrifices. Verse 42, there were also 4 tables of hewn stone for the burnt offering. Now this is very much unlike what we read about in the Old Testament when Moses received the instructions for the altar, the tabernacle, all that. It was always to have altars and things that were made of unhewn stone, raw material set up. But these tables are hewn. And then we have the size in the last part of verse 42. It says 1 cubit and a half long, 1 cubit and a half wide, 1 cubit high. On these they laid the instruments with which they slaughtered the burnt offering and the sacrifice. Verse 43, inside were hooks a handbreadth wide, fastened all around, and the flesh of the sacrifices was on the table. So not very tall, about the size of a desk there. The instruments for sacrificing are right there with them. Verse 44, outside the inner gate were the chambers for the singers in the inner court, one facing south at the side of the northern gateway and the other facing north at the side of the southern gateway. So there's an area for the musicians there, and there's an area for the priests. It says in verse 45, he said to me, this chamber which faces south is for the priests who have charge of the temple. Okay, there's going to be people in charge of this area, and that's for them. And then it says in verse 46, the chamber which faces north is for the priests who have charge of the altar, okay, the ones that actually do the sacrificing. These are the sons of Zadok from the sons of Levi who come near the Lord to minister to him. So these chambers are reserved for the musicians, the priests who have charge of the temple, and the priests who have charge of the sacrificing. And now we're going to go to the area inside the inner gates, okay? So now we still haven't actually entered into the northern part or the inner part of the temple yet. But it says he measured the court 100 cubits long and 100 cubits wide, 4 square. The area was in front of the temple. On your printout now, you can see this inner white area. The inner temple proper is about 150 feet by 150 feet with the temple in the middle, the altar in the middle. And then verse 48 says, then he brought me to the vestibule, the entryway of the temple, and measured the doorposts of the vestibule, 5 cubits on this side, 5 cubits on that side, and the width of the gateway was 3 cubits on this side and 3 cubits on that side. There's huge pillars there as you look at the temple area itself. We're looking back out. That's the outer courtyard there. Verse 49, the length of the vestibule was 20 cubits and the width 11 cubits. And by the steps which led up to it were pillars by the doorposts, one on this side and another on that side. Okay, the inside of this inner courtyard entryway is about 30 feet by 18, around there or so. And we just made it through a chapter of talking about the temple. Can you believe that? There we go. It's actually going pretty quicker than I thought it would. You guys doing okay? Some of you are like, oh, yeah, hanging in there. Okay. One more chapter is what we're going to look at. And then I think next time we're together, we're probably going to speed up a little bit. But chapter 41. Then he brought me into the sanctuary and measured the doorposts, 6 cubits wide on one side and 6 cubits wide on the other side, the width of the tabernacle. If you got the text in front of you, it's kind of a parentheses that he adds there. Ezekiel's getting this tour, and so he says, hey, here's the doorposts and all that, and he's like, hey, that's the width of the tabernacle. I was like, hey, I know that one. That registers with me. So a little FYI there that the doorposts together, if we're talking about size here, just the doorposts is the width of the entire Old Testament tabernacle. Verse 2, the width of the entryway was 10 cubits, and the side walls of the entrance were 5 cubits on this side and 5 cubits on the other side. The last part of verse 2, now we're talking about the square footage of the temple proper. It says he measured its length 40 cubits and its width 20 cubits. talking about 1,800, 2,000 square feet here. This is the outer part of the temple, temple proper here, what we might call the Holy of Holies. But notice in verse 3, Ezekiel stays here, but his temple guide goes into the Holy of Holies, into the inner part of the sanctuary. And it says also, he went inside and measured the doorpost 2 cubits, and the entrance 6 cubits high, and the width of the entrance 7 cubits. So this is the doorway from the holy place into the most holy place. And what should register with us here is that there's no veil, okay? There's no veil from the holy place to the most holy place. That was rent in two when Christ had died, so there's no veil anymore. Verse 4, it says he measured the length 20 cubits and the width 20 cubits beyond the sanctuary, and he said to me, this is the most holy place. So this, he's still outside. The angelic guide yells out the measurements. Hey, it's 20 cubits by 20 cubits. It's about 30 by 30. It's a perfect square. It says this is the Holy of Holies. Now, verse 5, he takes us to the walls and the chambers around the temple proper area itself. And so it says in verse 5, next he measured the wall of the actual temple proper, 6 cubits. So that's about 9 to 10 feet thick, pretty thick last part of verse 5. The width of each side chamber all around the temple was 4 cubits on every side. Okay, there's chambers. As you can see on your printout, there was 30 chambers around the outside perimeter, but now there's chambers on the temple proper on that wall facing the courtyard. And these chambers are like 6 by 6 rooms. Again, we're not specifically told what they're for necessarily, but it says in verse 6, the side chambers were in 3 stories, one above the other, 30 chambers in each story. They rested on ledges which were for the side chambers all around, that they might be supported, but not fastened to the wall of the temple. Now, this is cool. Look at what it says coming up. Verse 7, it says, as one went up from story to story, the side chambers became wider all around, because the supporting ledges in the wall of the temple ascended like steps. Therefore, the width of the structure increased as one went up from the lowest story to the highest by way of the middle one. Okay, so listen to this. There's a great visual there, the spiral staircases. And let me read this, that same part of that verse from the King James. It says, there was an enlarging and a winding, but still upward to the side chambers. For the winding about of the house went still upward round about the house. And so kind of these spiral staircases, and each level of these side chambers is a little farther out, and a little farther out. They get wider as they go up. And then it says in verse 8 and 9, I also saw the elevation all around the temple. It was the foundation of the side chambers, a full rod that is 6 cubits high. The thickness of the outer wall of the side chamber was 5 cubits, and so also the remaining terrace by the place of the side chambers of the temple. So this is the base area outside the temple itself. Again, it's about 10 feet high and about 7.5 to 8 feet wide there that the temple proper is on. And verse 10, between it and the wall chambers was a width of 20 cubits all around the temple on every side. So this whole area is surrounded by this like 30-foot platform there. The doors of the side chambers opened on the terrace, one door towards the north and another towards the south, and the width of the terrace was 5 cubits all around. So he's describing like the sidewalk type area there that around. And now we're going to leave the temple proper area, and we're going to go to an area behind the temple. And again, if you have your printout, you'll see it there. This is on the far west. This is the back. The front of the temple is the east, the back. And it's called the storage in your handout there. It says, verse 12, the building that faced the separating courtyard at its western end was 70 cubits wide. The wall of the building was 5 cubits thick all around, and its length 90 cubits. This is not another little 6 by 6 storage area. This is a huge building with thick walls, and it gets you thinking. It's like, okay, why did we spend all this time describing, little chambers that were 6 by 6 that we don't know what's for, and then go and talk about this 15,000 square foot structure that we have no idea what it's for? You're not going to tell us? What is this thing for? Presumably it's for storage or whatnot, But when we get there, let's go just check it out. Let's just walk around there and, we can go back there, I'm pretty sure. So we'll just walk back there and peek our head and see what's in there. Verses 13 to 15, so it says he measured the temple 100 cubits long, and the separating courtyard with the building and its walls was 100 cubits long. So we got that thing right there. Maybe some of you guys are construction guys like Ryan. I don't know, maybe they have these things that's all laser now. You don't even need a tape measure anymore. You just go like this and okay, there you go. That's how long it is, And maybe that's what they have here. He's got this rod, but maybe he's just let me show you how far that is, Ezekiel. Sticks it out there. And it says, also the width of the eastern face of the temple, including the separating courtyard, was 100 cubits. He measured the length of the building behind it, facing the separating courtyard, with its galleries on the one side, and on the other side, 100 cubits, as well as the inner temple and the porches of the court. Now, verse 16, we get to some aesthetics. He describes the windows and the trim. He says, their doorposts and the beveled window frames and the galleries all around their 3 stories opposite the threshold were paneled with wood from the ground to the windows. The windows were covered from the space above the door, even to the inner room, as well as outside, and on every wall all around, inside and outside, by measure. He's going to continue to describe the furnishings now. And verse 18 says, it was made with cherubim and palm trees, a palm tree between the cherub, between cherub and cherub. And then notice this, each cherub had 2 faces, verse 19 and 20, so that the face of a man was toward a palm tree on one side, and the face of a young lion toward a palm tree on the other side. Thus it was throughout the temple all around, from the floor to the space above the door, and on the wall of the sanctuary, cherubim and palm trees were carved. So there's, you can see, we can go back. Is it okay? Can we go back? Is that a thing? Okay, so you can kind of see man's face this side, lion's face this side, right? Okay, so, but normally cherubs, if you read through the Old Testament, had 4 faces. What we're missing is they had these 2, but they also had the face of an ox and an eagle. I'm not sure why those are missing. I don't know that anyone knows, but these cherubs have these 2 faces. One's facing a palm tree. Okay, now you can go. One's facing the palm tree on this side. One's facing the palm tree on the other side. I don't know. It looks gorgeous the way it's presented right there. And aren't you thankful? Let me just remind us. Aren't we thankful for this? Because if I was just reading, it's kind of whatever, just me reading it right now with the visuals, but can you imagine without? Okay, verse 21 and 22, the doorposts of the temple were square, as was the front of the sanctuary. Their appearance was similar. The altar was of wood, 3 cubits high, and its length 2 cubits. Its corners, its length, and its size were of wood. And he said to me, this is the table that is before the Lord. Okay, this is about 5 feet high, 3 feet high, and what's unique about that, it mentions a couple times that this is made of wood. So it says the altar. It's probably not an altar for sacrificing. If you guys can picture in your minds the temple, the tabernacle. There's between the holy place and the most holy place, there is a altar of incense, and so maybe that's kind of what's being described here. I'm not sure. Verse 23. The temple and the sanctuary had 2 doors. The doors had a 2-panel apiece, 2 folding panels, 2 panels for one door and 2 panels for the other door. Verse 25, cherubim and palm trees were carved on the doors of the temple, just as they were carved on the walls. A wooden canopy was on the front of the vestibule outside. There were beveled window frames and palm trees on one side and on the other, on the sides of the vestibule, also in the side chambers of the temple and on the canopies. We made it. That's all we're doing tonight. It's just 2 chapters. There's nothing to that, you guys. Man, I talk so fast because I'm like, oh man, there's a lot to get through, and now we're done early. Okay, but you're miles ahead of a lot of Christians who've never read through this, and so you're gonna, when we get there, you're gonna be like, we studied this back in Ellensburg. Let me show you around. I'm gonna show you the building out back. I still don't know what's in it, but let's go back. But we're going to be able to go there and say, hey, we studied this and we know all about it. But again, man, kudos to you guys. There's value in this. Don't think that this is just a task to get through. There's a reason it's Scripture. Or, all things spoken before were written for our learning. Through the patience and comfort of Scripture, we might have hope, and we have a hope that one day our Lord is going to rule and reign again in the millennium, and we are going to be there with him. Amen? Hey, let's pray, because there is no veil.